Take your seats, everyone.
Where do we take them?
We'll take them to your farm, and we'll visit the cows. All 30 of them. 30?
40.
40? Wow.
We got 5 babies right now.
5 baby cows.
5 more coming.
Wow. That's amazing.
AOC is going to outlaw them.
Huh?
AOC is going to outlaw them.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, here we are. Thank you all for coming, everyone. My name is Peter Falkenberg Brown. I'm the chairman of the Gray Republican Committee, and we are honored to have everyone here tonight to discuss the crisis of immigration at the Mexican border. We'll have 3, possibly 4 sections of this program. The first will be a short talk from myself, followed by Jack Wibby, our secretary, presenting an open letter, which is going to be very interesting to all of you if you haven't heard it. And then our main keynote will be around 7 o'clock from Robert Casimiro on the main topic of the immigration crisis at the southern border. He has personal testimony based on his many visits there. And then around 7:30, we'll have questions and answers and discussion and see how that goes. And possibly around 10 of 8 or 8, depending on how the Q&A goes, we're hoping that the candidate for District 45 for the House of Representatives, Casey Hughes, will show up if he can get here. Not sure 100%, but if he can, he'll come and give a few minutes of remarks just about his candidacy, which will be on June 11th. So if you haven't marked your calendar yet, you should mark it for June 11th to go vote for the Republican candidate for House of Representatives, Casey Hughes. And that's an important date. So if you haven't had if you don't have a flyer, there's some extra flyers for tonight's event at the table. You can pick up and take home with you as a reference. We also have an email sign-up sheet. So if you're not on our email list, we invite you to sign up with your email, and then you can keep informed of what we're doing. And we also have monthly meetings, the 4th Wednesday of every month, usually right here in this room, from 6:30 to 8. Sometimes it changes the date, so you can always check our website, which is grayrepublicans.org, and find out all about our meetings and whatever else is going on. And we try to put some essays and articles of note and news items of interest to conservatives on that website. So if you go there, you might be interested in a few of the things there. Let's see. I think that's all the announcement kind of things. Anybody else from our committee have anything that they need to add to that? Of newsy things? Maybe not. So, well, the topic of immigration at the southern border is a vital one. It is a crisis. My introductory talk to that topic is not focused on what's happening there physically, which Bob will talk about. I'm going to focus on what I would say there's a larger issue of American sovereignty and American exceptionalism. But it is a crisis. There's definitely a crisis there. Kirstjen Nielsen, the former Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, said in March of this year, "We have a system-wide meltdown. We are witnessing the real-time dissolution of the immigration system." And that's a frightening thought. It's a crisis that I think has been shaped partly because of the conflict of 2 opposing worldviews. One worldview is the standard traditional American worldview that holds individual rights as sacred and sovereign and believes in the sovereignty of the country, where all the individuals in the country and the country as a whole has the sovereign right to manage their own affairs. And I think that's very normal for most of us. We believe we have those individual rights. We grew up with them. But there is an opposing worldview presented by the left, a worldview that I might describe as something they present as a compassionate, utopian worldview of a world where borders are not necessary everyone is taken care of by a benevolent government. And it sounds very good. So it's very appealing to people who are in poverty, who are in dire straits. The government will take care of you. People that have young children now, or millennial children that aren't making enough money, are trying to live on a minimum wage. It sounds very, very attractive to have the government take care of you. But the problem with the leftist worldview is that even though they talk about taking care of the individual, the distinct difference between their view and the conservative traditional American view is that they don't give the individual rights. You have some rights, but not the rights that we enjoy through our system of government. The worldview of globalism or compassion and having the government take care of you, and the worldview of open borders where we should just invite everyone in because everyone has a right to be taken care of. Even the Pope recently said that we should just welcome more and more immigrants. Well, if you want to love people, it sounds very, very normal to do that. And the left is pushing this agenda very hard. In January of this year, Farhad Manjoo wrote in the New York Times, "Imagine moving from Nigeria to Nebraska as freely as one might move from Massachusetts to Maine." Just imagine that for a moment, where you can just move into America and out of America as if it was just another state. Well, it sounds good if you think about compassion and love and kindness. But there's a problem with it, and one of the problems with it is that if the world was a world where every individual in it was a saint, or even if every individual in it lived according to the traditional American style of living and respected the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, well, maybe it would work. But the world is not like that. There are many, many dreadful and violent people in the world. And if we remove our borders completely and have open borders with no restrictions, it would have a very bad effect. We have to be careful about who we invite into our homes, who we invite into our country. So let's think about that for a minute. Traditionally, in free countries, it's been kind of a truism that individuals they have the right to decide who comes into their house, who comes into their living room, their bedroom, their bathroom, and camps out. How many of you all here think that you all have the right to decide who comes into your house, that you have the right to lock your door if you want to? Raise your hand if you agree with that. Everybody agrees with that, right? That's normal. But not everybody in the world agrees with that, and people on the left don't necessarily agree with that. Nancy Pelosi has declared that walls are immoral. And many people on the left are I don't think she has a wall around her house, but I'm sure she locks her door.
She does.
So the question then is, would people who disagree with that concept, that we have the right to decide who comes into our house, would they like it if hundreds of us showed up and camped out in their living room? There's an activist named Laura Loomer, a conservative activist, who actually, barged onto Nancy Pelosi's yard and kind of camped out for a bit, and she was removed by the police, probably at Nancy Pelosi's request. So there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy going on in the left when they say we have to be compassionate and open our borders for all, but they keep their doors locked. So if we look at the difference then of individual rights, the conservative right is very strong about individual rights. The left talks compassion but is not strong about individual rights. The communists talked about taking care of the workers. The evil, industrialists are oppressing the workers. Today in America, on the left, everything is a narrative of oppressor versus oppressed. So we have to help the oppressed. We have to get rid of the oppressors. The problem is that when they get rid of the oppressors, they start to eat their own. They don't actually honor the individual. Even now in the arguments with political correctness on the left, they have arguments about feminism and gender issues and transgender issues. And the tennis player, Martina Navratilova, who's a lesbian, came out against trans women in sports. She thought it was terribly unfair where men decide that they're women and go compete in sports against biological women and, beat the crap out of them, wrestling or weight. I just saw a video the other day, a man identifying as a woman won some contests doing weightlifting. Well, duh. So, of course he did. But Martina Navratilova, who's a leftist lesbian, was trashed and compared to, and she was called a Nazi because she thought it was unfair for a man who identifies as a woman to compete in women's sports. So the left talks compassion, open borders, but they don't actually take care of every individual. They don't give every individual the rights to do what they want. You have rights as long as you toe the line, as long as you agree with the party line. So if we look at the countries around the world that are not free, like North Korea, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, if we look at countries in history that have not been free, really, I think that you might say that the general standard of life throughout all of human history was that people were not free. Individuals were not free. They were oppressed by one form of empire or totalitarianism or dictatorship or another. The Roman Empire, the Islamic empires. It's been a terrible history of oppressing individuals until one day in 1776, a bunch of relatively young men got together, many in their 20s and 30s, some in their 40s, some older like Benjamin Franklin. But Thomas Jefferson was only 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And it was an amazing event that happened there because the world had not been free. The countries around the world had not had freedoms defined until the Founding Fathers defined them. And I know we all know this sentence, but I'm going to read it anyway because I believe this sentence defines America and defines a standard of freedom that we need to cling to and adhere to and never forget. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Endowed by their Creator, not from government, from God, from a source that no one can argue with or interfere with. Sacred, unalienable rights that every human being has. Now, in the left, in America, people tend to trash America, trash the Founding Fathers. Well, America was founded on racism and slavery and bigotry and misogyny, and Jefferson had slaves and Washington had slaves, and it's terrible, and there's nothing to be proud of. America was never great. A lot of leftist leaders are saying that now. But think about where America stood in the long stream of thousands of years of human history. 5,000 years of recorded history, where slavery was endemic everywhere, where human life was cheap. To live a long life was a miracle. If you didn't die from disease, you died from getting your head chopped off or impaled. I'm part Swedish. I thought, oh, that's not bad, but think about the Vikings. They were horrible, but everybody else was horrible too, almost. So it wasn't a good world. So when these men in 1776 put together the Declaration of Independence and then just a few years later created the Constitution with the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, this was an incredible watershed event in human history. They weren't perfect. The southern states still had slaves. It was a compromise to create a union of 13 colonies, but compared to what had gone before, it was amazing. And then, because it wasn't perfect, 75 years later, at the end of the Civil War in 1865, over 360,000 Union soldiers had died to free the slaves, including 40,000 black Union soldiers who fought along with them. This was an incredible, marvelous, noble sacrifice. Most of the white Union soldiers had never owned a slave. Many of them had probably never seen a slave. How could they? But they got up, they went out, and they sacrificed themselves for the sake of those African Americans who were in slavery. We can't ever let that sacrifice be swept under the rug by leftist apologists who just say, oh, America's racist. That was not a racist act to die to free the slaves. And yes, after Lincoln was shot, the restoration of the South didn't go well. It took another 100 years until the 1960s for true, total civil rights to come to all races. But in the 1960s, with Martin Luther King, etc., full racial human rights came to all races in America. By that time, full rights had been granted to women. So finally, in the 2000s, America could elect a black president, not once, but twice. This is not a racist act. America is not a racist country because we elected a black president. And now in 2019, women are running for president. A black woman is running for president, Kamala Harris, and no one cares. No one cares about their race. No one cares about their gender unless it's to admire them. But America has come an incredible distance from 1776 until now. I think it's safe to say that America has matured, and really young 33-year-old Thomas Jefferson's words have flowered now. Now when millennials are running around saying America's a racist country and Black Lives Matter is saying that America's a racist country, it's a lie. There is no institutional racism. There's no, yes, there are still racists, a few running around, but not that many. And as a country, we are incredible and we are exceptional. So my topics tonight are American sovereignty and American exceptionalism. We are indeed an exceptional country, and we are a sovereign country, and we have to protect that. If we open our borders to unfettered, unrestricted immigration, waves of immigrants will come in. Not like the legal immigrants who came in over the last 250 years. We're proud of immigrants. We're all from immigrants. E pluribus unum, out of many one. Immigrants came gratefully, respectfully. They learned our history, they learned our language, they learned our culture, they learned about the Constitution, they took their citizenship tests, and they said from almost every country in the world, finally, I'm an American. I'm proud to be an American. And they contributed. However, even though immigration has helped make America great, unfettered, unrestricted immigration will destroy America's sovereignty and destroy America's exceptionalism, because millions upon millions of immigrants would come in who didn't have to study our history, didn't have to study our language, didn't have to learn about the Constitution, and wouldn't contribute to it. It wouldn't come with love and respect and gratitude for the principles that make America free. And that would be a dreadful thing. Those immigrants, those millions and millions and millions of immigrants coming in through an open borders immigration system, would receive tons of free stuff from the party that wants to give them free stuff. And you know which party I'm talking about, right? Not the Republican Party. The one begins with D. They would receive all that free stuff, and they would give their votes to that party. Because they gave their votes to that party, the demographics of voting in America would be completely changed. And it wouldn't be changed for the better. I believe that if open borders immigration happens and continues so that America is flooded with illegal aliens and immigrants who don't care about America, 10, 15, 20 years from now, the Democrat Party will use those votes to radically alter America. They'll alter the Constitution, they'll alter the Bill of Rights. Pretty soon we could easily see that America could become socialist, and then America could become totalitarian. And finally, with a totalitarian socialist country in place, fast forward another 10 or 15 or 20 years, it would be just like Venezuela. Everyone would be flat broke, poverty everywhere, and millions of people would want to leave, as they're doing from Venezuela right now. Rachel Campos Duffy wrote for Fox News in January of 2018 about a Venezuelan immigrant who came to America and was at a meeting, and he stood up and he had an American flag in one hand and a Venezuelan flag in the other. And he said, "We need to educate our children to be wary of those who promise us free things. I don't care if it's a bag of rice or a washing machine. Nothing is worth your freedom. It's priceless." They've seen it happen in Venezuela. It used to be one of the richest countries in South America, and now it's the poorest. We don't want that to happen to America. We need to, for the sake of the founding fathers, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands of people that have died to make America free, for the sake of millions of people around the world who are not in freedom now and want to come to America and be free legally, respectfully, and gratefully. For the sake of freedom, we need to defend the American sovereignty and American exceptionalism. We need to make sure that America does not perish as a free country of sacred individualism. Therefore, in my opinion, we have to thoroughly oppose any concept of open immigration at the border. So, amen to that. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to ask Jack Wibby, our secretary, to come up and present a special open letter.
I have a friend, a lady who lives in Knox County. Her name is Paula Sutton, and Paula has been serving in the state legislature for about 6 or 7 years. Paula's a very sensible individual, a person who works hard, owns her own business, very independent individual. And she wrote an open letter to Senator Collins, which she sent to the Bangor Daily News, who, of course, would not publish it. So Paula's friend, Heather Shiraki, who was another really able legislator, went out and raised $900. And they put this in the Bangor Daily News as an advertisement. This is an open letter to Senator Susan Collins. It's dated February 11th, 2019. Dear Senator Collins, I am writing to you as the Knox County Committee woman for the Maine GOP and a former Maine State Representative. I proudly served the communities of Warren Hope Union and Appleton in House District 95. In the early 1990s, my late father retired and my parents moved from Maine back to Texas. My dad grew up in Laredo, a border town on the Rio Grande River, and spoke Spanish fluently. He loved everything about Texas: the land, the weather, the terrain, and especially the people, Texans. All of them, the Mexican Americans and the ranch owners, were his friends. They bought a large cattle ranch approximately 20 miles from the Mexican border and set up shop. I visited the ranch several times and can personally tell you about all the problems they had with illegal immigrants, drug activity, and struggling border patrol. By law, they had to fence the entire property and post signs in English and Spanish saying private property, keep out. Frustrated by Maine's overregulation and unfriendly business environment, all they wanted was to retire, to be left alone, and to raise some cattle. It did not happen. They were forced out of their first ranch by illegal immigrants crossing the border at all times of day and night. They were afraid for their lives. They moved and bought a different ranch. They gave up on cattle and tried exotic wild game further north of the border, but things were no different there. When I visited, it was unsafe for me to ride the trails due to the people lurking on the property. Illegal aliens would routinely cut the expensive game fence, leaving valuable animals with an easy way to escape. The caravans of immigrants openly flaunted their freedom with campfires and barbecues, where they feasted on Dad's slaughtered animals. They left behind piles of trash, dirty diapers, Mexican lottery tickets, and evidence of illicit drug use. One day while visiting, my parents were off location and I was alone. Walking to the barn to check on some newly born game birds, I came across a group of 5 young men rummaging around behind the building. From their body language and facial expressions, I was fearful of being raped. The large caliber firearm strapped to my waist in plain sight is likely the only reason I was not. I was terrified on my parents' own ranch. Border Patrol was a joke. They were underfunded and did not care. My dad would call and they would send an air-conditioned van to take people back across the border, only to know they would return again in a few days. Talk in the local coffee shop and feed store in town was not hopeful that the situation would improve, and they were right. It got so dangerous and frustrating, my dad engaged an organization called Ranch Rescue to come and help defend his property. Sadly, he was sued by the dreaded Southern Poverty Law Center. Because they represented an illegal that lied and accused my father of terrorizing him when in fact it was my parents, frustrated and law-abiding citizens, that were the victims. All this from a man who was in this country illegally, who was on my father's ranch with clearly posted land in English and Spanish. The man won the lawsuit, saying my father made him afraid. My father made him afraid. A man who was caught trespassing in the middle of the night on terrain covered with coyotes, rattlesnakes, scorpions, and cactus said he was more afraid of my father, and he won. Private property rights should mean something. Public safety should be a priority for tax-paying Americans. Build the wall. Thank you. Warm regards, Apologies Sutton. Postscript, February 11th. Reed Brown's overture requesting my letter for publication alongside his column came as a surprise. When Mr. Brower reached out as the first contact from this publication, I saw it as a welcome measure of civility despite some reserve as to potential motivations. My commitment to share my family's experiences on the open southern border was simple. I love my country and believe law-abiding Americans need and deserve secure borders. What happened to my family should never have occurred and hopefully will not happen to anyone else. Illegally crossing our border is against the law. This country was founded on the rule of law. Law should apply equally to each individual and not play favorites. There is a process by which we change laws. My story is true. My retired parents, now deceased, were the real victims. When security guards from Ranch Rescue reached out to help them, they were at their wits' end and fearful for their lives. What would you do if your properly posted property and fenced in were repeatedly invaded and your animals were slaughtered and eaten? They needed help. Allegations were made by people who were caught unlawfully gaining entry into our country and were represented by lawyers with an agenda. A lawsuit based upon lies and distortion resulted in criminals winning a settlement. My parents' American dream was stolen from them. I pray this never happens to you. We should be talking about securing our borders, protecting our citizens, stopping human trafficking, and preventing drugs and violent gangs from infiltrating our nation. I emailed Laura Paula this morning asking her if she had received a reply from Senator Collins, and she said she had. It was generic and self-serving. It meant nothing. I also remember a letter from Shelley Pingree, who wrote to my friend Ken Porter, who's a retired Navy Chief Petty Officer, about border security. And Ken had written Shelley and asked her to vote for the wall. And she said, she returned another form letter, self-serving, of course. And she returned, and she returned the letter saying that she was not in favor of the wall because there was new technology. New technology which would prevent people from crossing the border. Think about that, my friends. Anyway, I am very dissatisfied, this is my personal opinion, with the Maine congressional delegation. And I'm going to do everything I can to change it. And it is now my pleasure to introduce, are you going to?
I have a little bio I'd like to
Oh,
read.
okay.
Thank you, Jack.
Oh, you're welcome. I can still read.
Thank you very much. That was a powerful letter. Paula Sutton wanted to come and read it herself and give her own testimony, but unfortunately she had a conflict, but she was highly in favor of us doing it for her. So we're running a wee bit late, but we can go after 8 o'clock. So you just give your whole presentation. Don't worry about a thing. And also Mr. Casey Hughes has joined us, and he'll be speaking after our Q&A about his candidacy. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Robert Casimiro. Bob Casimiro spent 3 years on active duty in the U.S. Army, followed by 20 years as a design and project engineer for Firestone Tire and Rubber in Ohio. He has a degree in chemistry as well as an MBA, which he utilized while working in the financial services industry. He wrote commentary for the Weymouth News, did I pronounce that right, Weymouth? In Weymouth, Massachusetts, and was a candidate for Counselor at Large in Weymouth in 2005. While in Massachusetts, he served as the executive director of the Massachusetts Citizens for Immigration Reform, and now in Maine, he's the executive director of Mainers for Responsible Immigration. He's committed to the protection of our borders and has made numerous trips to both the Mexican and Canadian borders, and today he comes to us from Bridgeton. Thank you very much, Bob. So let's welcome Bob. Thank you.
What a bio! I don't want to listen to that guy.
I don't even hear you.
If anybody can't hear me back, just kind of raise your hand. Jack was talking about getting form letters from Congresswoman Pingree and Senator Collins. I've received the same letters. And I tried to meet with Congresswoman Pingree, but that wasn't a possibility. So I went into Portland a couple of times, talked to her chief of staff. All right, sunrise in the Arizona desert. It's a lovely place to get down there. Most of the time I've been down there, it's been in March and April. Perfect time. Perfect time to go. It's not too cold at night, and it doesn't get too hot during the day. It can be 42 to 45 degrees outside, and in my tent it'll be around 50 degrees. And there's nothing better to prepare a cup of coffee and at 6 a.m. when the sun rises to get out there and watch the sunrise over the desert. After that, it's all downhill when you have to go chase illegals around the desert. On my first trip, when I was in the Army, we had one of the guys was called Kentuck. He was from Kentucky. We didn't know his name. We called him Kentuck. So on my first trip to the border, I came across another Kentuckian. And I'd been there a few days, and I had taken I just decided to take a walk up to the mountains. Now, where I was at the mountains, the mountains where the fort comes down from the north to the south, and there's this, at the top they have a peak, Montezuma's Peak, and you go up there and have a nice view. So I went there and took a walk. When I was coming back, there was a Border Patrol truck parked there, so I decided to talk to the Border Patrol agent. And this is 2005 when we first went down there, and I don't know if you remember when the Minutemen went to the border. They went to Tombstone, Arizona, that's where we assembled, and then we spread out and we started doing the border watch thing. Well, the Border Patrol was a little leery of us. They didn't know what we were up to. It could have been a bunch of vigilantes. So the Border Patrol supervisors had told their Border Patrol agents, don't talk to these people. So anyways, I went up to this, this truck, excuse me, talked to the Border Patrol agent. He was from Kentucky. And then first thing we discussed was this gag order. And he says to me, I'm an American. Nobody tells me who I can talk to. So he proceeded to talk for an hour about the drug trade. And let me just, so this is Montezuma Pass. This truck would have been over here, and they parked there so they can look down across the border into Mexico, you know, to see if there's any activity coming across. But anyways, he talked to me about this drug kingpin from Mexico called Pablo Acosta. And I bought the book and I've read it and I've got another copy at home. But anyways, this is a guy who lived in Onaga, Mexico, which is across the border from Presidio, Texas. On one of my trips, I would stop to Presidio and I talked to one of the activists there and spent 2 days with him. And we went across the border to Onaga. But anyways, this guy operated there in the 1980s. And the way it works is it's kind of like having a franchise. He's allowed to do the drugs in that area, but each month he has to kick back some money to the officials, which would be the military officials for that particular district. Well, anyways, he ran afoul of the authorities, so they decided to get rid of him, so he died in a gunfight. And I think it was in the late 1980s. So that was my introduction. Pretty much introduction to the border and to the drugs. Now, this is also at the same place, Montezuma Pass, and I took this picture 2 years ago. And that's the mountain, those are the Huachuca Mountains, and at the north end of the Huachuca Mountains is Fort Huachuca, which is an army post that has been there since, I think, the 1870s or something like that. But anyway, these are two trucks that have cameras and they have radar and imaging systems. So they watch what's going on in the mountains. And this is a transit area for the drugs going across there. And we did part of our border watch on the east side of those mountains along Arizona Highway 92. And I went up and I talked to one of these guys, and so he has a computer with a screen, and whenever they see activity or motion up, they put the little dots on the screen to show where all the activity is. And then the idea is to try to capture the drugs coming across the mountain. I don't know how particularly effective it is because the drugs keep coming and it doesn't seem like there's been any let up in that at all. All right, now let me get into borders, barriers, and fences. Now, this is in 2005 when I first went to the border. That's me. I haven't aged a day, have I? And then I'm with Jim Gilchrist. He was the founder of the Minuteman Project. He was a Vietnam veteran and retired accountant from California. And it was his idea in 2005 to come to the border and start up this Minuteman Project. The idea, of course, was not to apprehend illegals or assist the Border Patrol in apprehending illegals. It was just, the idea was to bring publicity to the fact that the border was so insecure. So that's how it got started. And behind us, it's Mexico behind us, and this is a 5-strand barbed wire fence. And that was the barrier right there. And the place we're at is called Naco, Arizona, which is south of Tucson. So anyway, this is the standard fence that they have. It's about 13-foot high fence, and it has round pipes like this, because I know they're round pipes and they feel like this, because I've had my hands around them enough times. So that's pretty much the standard construction of 13-foot fence. I was surprised last year when I went to the border with the Golden Girls. These are two women who are part of our organization who went down to the border with me. That's Judy Hurst and Gail Doman. And they went down to the border with 2 women, so that was kind of interesting. But anyway, they're standing in front of the fence. This is a newer construction. It's 20 feet high, and it has this bollard at the top. It's about 4 feet high. So if you're climbing up, you can't reach to the top because because of that 4 feet bollard. And I should getting real graphic here. As I say, the other fences has posts like this. On one of the trips I went there, which was 2007, I went with a friend of mine from Lovell, and also a friend of mine from Colorado that I met. And we were walking along the fence line, and he was in his early 60s at the time. And he said, you can really climb up these things easily. So here he is, he just doing it right up that fence so easily with those posts about that size. So this one, in addition to the additional height and putting the bollard up there, they changed the shape of them. So rather than round, it's 4-sided like this. So the whole structure, which is higher with the bollard, different shape for the posts, that makes it more difficult to, go over the border. So nothing is going to stop them. It's just that they just try, they come up with the newer technologies and new designs and make it more difficult. Of course, this is a construction company that has a proposal for putting these 20-foot high fences along the border. And they may submit a proposal, but this is a continuing type of thing. You might have gotten an impression from reading the papers or the news that when Trump wants to put up his border wall, that if he's not getting to put up his border wall, nothing happens. But it does happen, it's on a continuing basis. Of course, you may have seen this. This is, there were 8 different models that were brought. This is in San Diego for border wall construction. And these are higher, these are 40 feet. Remember, Trump went there one day to look them over to select which would be the best one to build his border wall. The Democrats in Congress say, no, there'll be no border walls built of this particular construction. And they probably won't be, but as long as they can continue and get the funding to, improve on the size and the type of fencing, they'll just, there's a continuing thing to help secure the border. Any questions at this time? All right. Where it's at. Okay. I didn't talk about any of my trips, but here's a map of the southwest United States. Now, the area that I've gone to in Arizona is in the Tucson area. And the Tucson area, if you read that in the newspaper about the Tucson area, it covers almost all of the border with Mexico. From New Mexico on over to Yuma. Yuma's in a different district. So I've gone to all these places every one of my trips. On 2 of my trips, I went through Houston. I have friends that live there, so I went to Houston and stayed with them. And on going across there, one time I stayed with some activists over in this area right here. And another thing, I mentioned Presidio, Texas, which is right here. And I spent a couple of days with an activist there in Presidio, Texas. So even though I just gone to Arizona every trip, I've been able to go to other locations. Also in New Mexico, in Deming, New Mexico, I spent a day with a group there. So I've been all across the border, pretty much, and participating in all these border watches and all these groups. The other place I haven't gone to, which I'm going to next week, is McAllen, Texas, and the Rio Grande Valley. I don't know if you've read about that in the news. But in 2012, that's when these unaccompanied alien minors started coming, if you can remember that. And that's down here in McAllen, Texas, and the Rio Grande Valley. So that's one of the places that I haven't been to, and it's really a hotbed of activity, so I want to go there. Field operations. All right, I'll spend a little time with some pictures showing the groups I was with and what we do down at the border. This first group, this is called Arizona Border Defenders. It's a volunteer group. They're from the Tucson area. And they go down on weekends. They have placed cameras up in the mountains, motion sensitive cameras, so that when something goes by, whether it's a cow or illegal or border patrol, it picks it up. And these cameras have solar panels, and it has antenna, so that this guy, who is the leader right here, he can be sitting in his office, and if that camera is activated because of motion something, he can look at his phone and see what it is that's going on there. So you can see these guys look pretty formidable. I have an old Army surplus Air Force jacket that I wear, and an old bunch of pants and some hiking boots, so I wouldn't want to get in that picture. I'd look completely out of it. But these guys are not vigilantes. I want to stress that. Vigilantes enforce the law. We don't do that. We observe and report. When we start out, before going up in the mountains, he says, we do not brandish our weapons. We do not use threatening language. So that's the way it is. Now, it just so happened that when we were going west up the mountains, there were 4 illegals going south, and then we intersected them. And of the 4, 2 dropped their packs and ran away, and 2 of them sat down because when they saw the armament there, they just, they figured this was officials. So anyways, these were the 2 illegals that stopped. They are from Chiapas. I don't know if you're familiar with Chiapas. Chiapas is the southernmost state in Mexico, and it is also the poorest. It's the poorest, so that's why you'll see a lot of these Mexicans from Chiapas, coming into the country. This one guy over here, he had been working up in New York, so they were just making a going type of visit back then. This guy is 19 years old. It was his first trip. This forlorn creature here, I really do feel compassion for these people. I understand exactly where they're coming from and their situation. But it's, we just have to secure our border and we have to enforce it. One thing I'd like you to note is that you see on his 2 feet, he has just his boot over there, or his walking boot, and he has a bootie on this one. You can see that's different. When they come across the border, they have to buy a backpack, they have to buy a gallon jug of water, which is black, because the idea of being black, it won't reflect the sun. And they also have to buy these booties. And the reason to put the booties on is they're covered at the bottom with carpeting, so that they don't leave footprints. Because the way a lot of the Border Patrol agents follow the illegals is look at their footprints. If they can't track them, they can at least know that they've been across there, and then they can try to do something else. So that's the type of thing. And then we brought them down from the mountain and called the Border Patrol. And the Border Patrol came and they emptied their knapsacks and make sure they didn't have any contraband or any weapons. And then they would put them in the back of this truck and they would take them up to Tucson where they would be processed. Now, for the past few years, I've been going out with another group. This is called the Arizona Board of Recon. And they were initially in Sassabee, Arizona, and now they moved to Arivaca. But the guy who runs this operation, probably several times a year, they'll have an event where they'll invite all members of the group to come down for a week going out in the desert and doing this, border watch. And this is group. This is from 2 years ago. Now this is the leader of the group. Tim Foley is his name. He's a recovering alcoholic, a chain smoker, and he was a former steel worker. Guy who works on building the tall buildings, and he's a 82nd Airborne veteran. So. But anyway, what he's doing right now, they're getting ready to go out on an overnight exercise, and he's looking at the map and they're deciding where to go down at the border. From this point, From this point, they're just a few miles from the border. This is Foley. They have a very good relationship with the Border Patrol. They share information, and that's what he's doing right now. He's talking to one of the Border Patrol agents. So the idea that there's an animosity or between the groups like this and the Border Patrol is totally wrong. This is a very interesting one. Right here, you see this. You see that fellow right here? Right. This is the traffic, a vehicle barrier. And this is the border right here, Mexico, United States. We're up on the mountain here. That's where I took the picture from. And I heard this guy shouting, "Help me, help me!" And it turned out to be this guy, and he wanted water. He said they'd been in the desert on the Mexican side for 3 days. They were attacked by these groups that that prey on people coming across the border, and they have been roughed up by them, and now that they just wanted water. So we told them, "You come across the border and we'll give you some water," but he didn't want to do that because he knew he'd be arrested. So we get no water. But anyways, this is the type of thing we do. We go up in the mountains, have overnights, and just try to detect illegal entry. Now here's Foley. He's at the fence right here. That's where his dog is. His dog. And what he's looking at is here in this spot, this area here, because of the mountains, they don't have any of the large fences because you couldn't build them up there. And when you get to the high mountains, fewer and fewer illegal aliens was going to attempt to go across. So this is an area where the wire had been broken, and then this is an entry spot for the illegals. This is a bra. I don't know, have you ever heard of rape trees? Rape trees is when, and I'm sure you've read about one of the things that they talk about, the problems with the caravans coming is that they're preyed upon by people and raped, and women raped, and this happens. I've heard about this for years, and I've never seen one. I've seen photos, but I've never talked about it because I wanted to make sure I personally saw one. And this is a bra of a young woman that was put on a tree, which was only 200 yards from where we were camped. So this is a young woman who had been raped right there. And this is a continuing thing. One of the important things about securing our borders is to stop this type of stuff. I mean, abuse of people. And not only that, there's another thing that hundreds of illegal aliens die in the desert every year. Back in 2012, it was something like 453. And this is terrible. It shouldn't be happening. Nobody should be dying, on land. As a matter of fact, while I'm at it, I've got this 12-minute video. In 2004, which is the year before I went, a friend of mine from Framingham, Mass. went down there and spent a couple of days, and they were driving out in the desert, and with one of the local activists. And they came across 2 solos. Solos are illegal to come across without any guide, without to guide them along. One of the guys was lying under a bush, and he was in bad shape, kidney problems. If my friend hadn't come along, he would have died. So they called the sheriff and they sent an ambulance, and that's what this is, a 12-minute video that shows that. So another time you might want to watch that. Somebody might want to watch that. This is, I cannot tell you how infuriating it is to me, this whole situation. Not because not simply because our borders are secure, because there's so much, people that suffer and die and turmoil and the drugs coming across. And, well, this is another encampment we had. This was over near Sassabee, Arizona. Just to give you some idea of the, the terrain over there. This, that's me. And I'm looking up the mountains. This is the way the cartels work. They put scouts on these mountains. And the scouts have binoculars and they have radios. And the purpose of the scouts is to radio back to the cartels on the other side of the border to tell them when the coast is clear and there's no border patrol agents are there, so they can bring across the illegal aliens plus the drugs. They send the illegal aliens across first, because if for some reason the border patrol apprehends them, then the more valuable drugs will not have been lost. So they can sacrifice the money that they gain from having the illegals go across in order to protect the drugs. But anyway, so they operate. Actually, I saw a little, somebody move over the top of that mountain when I was there. It was probably a scout that was up there. So this is Foley. He's walking across the fence line. So, was it 3 years ago when I was there? So I spent 3 days with him, and we were walking the desert trails. And after 3 days, when you go down there, you see they have National Guard helicopters, they have the fences, they have sensors out in the desert, and they have what they call virtual fences, which they have high towers with cameras on them. And they have their quads that you can drive out in the desert. They have observation towers that can lift them up 20 feet so that in the flat desert you can see far. So they get all this stuff. So after 3 days, we were there at the fence line. I said, Foley, with all this stuff, why aren't we stopping every single illegal alien that comes across the border? And he says, we're waging a war with a shift mentality. We're waging a war with a shift mentality. And one of the things that refers to is the way the Border Patrol operates in 3 shifts. Now, I was camped probably 38 miles up from the border. And I would go out in the morning with my sign, you see it back there, Secure Our Border, and I'd get the next shift of the Border Patrol driving down to the border. And I'd go back an hour later, and then the shift that had been relieved would be driving back. Well, you have to understand, there's that time frame where the one shift is coming in before the other goes out, where there's no coverage. So that's what he's referring to. We're not using our technology to the most, or the way we use our personnel. And there's a whole lot of things that can be done to improve it. Caravans, oh yes, caravans. Now you've heard the term unaccompanied alien minors, I'm sure, which is a misnomer, because the term unaccompanied legally means if you don't have a parent or a legal guardian with you. That's what it legally means. However, these are some caravan members coming up to the border, and you can see an adult here. Well, that is an escort. It's so obviously not a parent, or it's not a legal guardian, so it's an escort. They're brought up by an escort. And as far as aliens, well, they're illegal aliens because as soon as they come across the border to give themselves up to the Border Patrol, then they become illegal aliens. And as far as children, these are not children, there's minors, legally minors, anybody up to the age of 18. So this is more accurately characterized as escorted illegal alien minors rather than unaccompanied alien children. So this is part of it. So what they are doing, they're just walking up the border, and they're presenting themselves to the Border Patrol, because according to our laws, if they're seeking asylum, they have to be given an interview. And so they have to be brought into the country. Now why did all this happen? Well, this is a graph. This shows apprehensions at the U.S. southwest border. And Donald Trump did not cause the problem at the border, not at all. But this is in February of 2017, and you can see the sharp rise in apprehensions of, and this pink spot, that's the family, that's been a big increase in them. And then the adults are here, and then the unaccompanied minors is the same. That's what's caused the problem, this sudden influx of families coming to the border. They just don't have the facilities to take care of them. Under the law, if somebody comes into the country, you're supposed to detain them, which means you have to house them and you have to have beds for them. Well, our bed space is severely limited, and at times when they request more bed space, the requests are denied by United States Congress, because it goes through Appropriations Committee first, because it's an expense item. So they denied the additional bed space. So what they've been doing is they've been trying to, maybe read about it, they've been going to army bases and military posts and trying to open up facilities to put these, put them there. So this is, as I say, it's a recent problem. Oh, I want to show this slide because this is interesting. From Bridgeton, Maine, where I live, down to Sasby, Arizona, where I generally go, it's 2,909 miles. From Tegucigalpa, which is the capital of Honduras, up to Tijuana, Mexico, where they've been ending up, it's 2,906 miles. It's only 3 miles difference. And it takes me 5 days to drive down there. And of course, when this all started, when we had these caravans coming, they followed them every day, and all this, how far did they go, and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, they were up in Tijuana. So they obviously got a lot of help. There's a group in Chicago, Pueblo Sin Fronteras, the People Without Borders, that has been actively helping, and there are other groups that are helping these caravans. But anyways, I thought that was quite interesting as far as the mileage. Because if I was stopping Bridgeton, I'd say to myself, well, I'm going to walk down to Sasby, Arizona. It'd probably take me 6 months. So. Okay, now why did this happen? Why suddenly do we have this influx of caravans, family members? Let me just go through this in detail. In 1985, there was a 15-year-old El Salvador girl who wanted to come into the country and be reunited. And at that time, it was the Immigration Nationalization Service that, before the Border Patrol, and they said, no, you can't do that. So she was turned away. So it went through the court system, and finally the Supreme Court in 1993 upheld the Immigration Naturalization Service, said, no, you cannot come in. And that was a 7-2 ruling. But in 1997, during the Clinton administration, they had a consent decree. And it said that, no, you can allow them to come in pending their attempt to reunite with their parents or relatives or somebody else who would take care of them. So this situation of all these caravans really started back in there when they started allowing these escorted illegal alien minors in. I'll skip over the 2005 TVPRA, but the thing that really got it going was this, 2008, this is the Trafficking Victims Protection Reenactment Act. Of course, the Trafficking Victims Act was designed to prevent victims of slavery and prostitution and provide support for them. But in December of 2008, 2 months before George Bush ended his presidency, he signed this into law, and it allowed it allowed all illegal alien children to come into the United States because it said that they should be provided legal help. Well, if you're going to have legal help, you have to be in the country. So they were allowed to stay in the country while their cases were adjudicated. Now, the government didn't provide the lawyers, but they could, if they could get pro bono lawyers, then they could have their case. So at that point, they were, like I say, everyone was allowed to come in. Also, because of the way the language was written and the law was written, in addition to just the individual children or minors coming in, it allowed to come in as family members. So this was the thing that really got it started. And there was another ruling by the Board of Immigration Appeals in 2014 when Obama was president. See, right now you have to determine, you have to assert that you're a threat of persecution if you go back to your home country. And there's 5 reasons: race, religion, nationality, member of a social group, or political affiliation. Those are the 5 reasons that you have to give in order to get asylum. In 2014, what they did, the Obama, they added domestic violence and threats from gangs. So they added that. But in 2017, when Jeff Sessions was Attorney General, they took that out. They took that back. And then there was the Flores Settlement Agreement. Of course, the Flores referring back to that 15-year-old El Salvadoran who came here to get the ball rolling. It said in the Flores Agreement that you couldn't keep them family members for more than 20 days. And this is the almost impossible thing to do because the average stay is over 30 days. As I mentioned before, when you come into this country on these procedures as illegals, you have to be detained. Of course, they can't detain them because they don't have the bed space, so that's when the Obama administration instituted this catch and release policy. You can't hold them, so you let them go, you give them a court date. Right now, the backlog for these court cases is something like 800,000, but it's going to take them years to get it. So essentially, what it is it's just it's another form of amnesty because a lot of them come in and they're not going to leave. Okay, this is a little busy, but I want you to leave with one thing. Number 13. Remember the number 13. This is let's say 100 of these caravan members come to the border seeking asylum. There are 20 that are rejected and not allowed into the country. There are 32 that are allowed into the country, but they never file asylum. When you come into the country and you have an initial interview with an asylum officer, and if he generally says, well, okay, you have reasons, for applying for asylum, then you're allowed into the country, and you have 1 year to file an official asylum request. So this group here, 32, they didn't file a request, so they just blended into the. Then there's 38 here that were denied asylum, and it ends up there's only 13 that were granted asylum out of the original 100. Which is probably not a bad thing, because you say, well, that's a pretty good screening process. The only trouble is the ones who don't show up for their court hearing, the ones that don't file, they don't self-deport. I read about it. I spend about an hour every day reading about this stuff, and I've never seen one instance about self-deportation. Because when you're denied asylum, they'll give you an order of removal to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which says this person was denied their asylum request, you have to leave the country. So that's what ICE does, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Okay. Where do we go from here? If anybody has an answer, please raise your hand. So out of the border, this Arizona Border Recon Group, they put cameras out in the desert, and these are motion-sensitive cameras. And what I will show you right now is one of the films they took, showing the drug cartels, the drug mules bringing drugs. This happens all the time.
Those are drug mules, right?
Those are mules, yeah. Now you can tell where they carry marijuana, cocaine, because marijuana is less dense, so their packs will stand up higher than their heads. So the smaller packs would indicate it's cocaine. About 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know if you remember, when down in southern Texas, where they had so many of these coming across, so many of these asylum seekers coming across, they had to take 200 Border Patrol agents from Arizona and send them down to Texas to process these caravan members. Sometime after that, I talked to Foley, and he says that because those Border Patrol agents were taken from Arizona, there was no coverage, and that more of the drugs were coming across. I would like to say things have gotten better in the past since I first went down there, but. Now this is another one. I kept asking him, we talk about guns that being brought into the country and who has the guns, and he says, well, there's guns. And then I finally got a video from him. And this shows cartels coming to the border, not across into the country.
So what are they doing? What are they doing with the horses taking the drugs?
Well, I don't know, they didn't have drugs with them, but these are part of the cartel, they're doing, they were observing at the border. Again, they're looking to bring the drugs across, so that's why. Well, it's interesting, the first video I. Anyway, the first video I showed you, when I was down there, a border patrol supervisor did it. And Foley was showing, behind his camera, he was showing his border patrol supervisor that video of the drugs play. And that's the one I had him send me, that you just saw. After a while, I was thinking about that. There's something wrong here. The border patrol supervisor should be showing him the videos that they captured of the drugs coming across, to show that they were, doing a better job of apprehending. So,
That's it.
We've got some questions for Bob?
If I may, could I just a second before we get ready for the Q&A?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm Bernal Beatty with Maine for Responsible Immigration, and while you're doing the Q&A, if you'd like to find out more about Maine for Responsible Immigration, you can talk to me here right now after we're done. If you'd like more information and stuff, and maybe get involved with us a little bit more, I'm gonna pass this around. Please give us your email, name and email address there, please. And like I say, I'll be around here to talk about our organization, what we do. Bob and I work together on this in Maine. I think you can say we're the largest active immigration group in Maine. That's not saying a lot, but I think it's so. But anyway, glad to talk to you, and people might like to get involved with the immigration issue. Please do so, and let us know. Thanks.
Any questions? Where do we go?
What happens to the people that they catch that are carrying the drugs across the border?
What happened to the mules?
When they catch one of them, what do they do to them?
Well, they apprehend them, they put them through the law enforcement process.
Which means what?
Well, they bring drugs into the country, which is illegal, so
Right.
that's.
They're coming into the country, it's illegal too.
Yeah, so they're processed according to our laws. I really haven't read, read a whole lot,
I don't have emails, so.
so I really haven't read a whole lot about what happens to the mules. There's a lot about the drugs being apprehended and the amount of drugs, but they don't mention anything about what happens to the mules.
Well, my question is, do they just take and do like they do with some others and maybe just send them back, or they just let them say, okay, they're here and they stay?
I really can't answer that, and because of what, I see and how lax they get sometimes, you just wonder what happened. But I don't know.
Okay.
I can't answer the question specifically. Anybody else? Sir?
Is there a continuous barrier, even though it may not be very effective from coast to coast at the southern border?
No, well, when you get in the mountains, there's nothing up in the mountains, because you can't build it up there, number one. Number two, the illegal aliens aren't going to come across the mountains, it's a little too difficult. The cartels will bring drugs across there because, they have the mules to do it, so. But there's no continuous barrier. You got the Rio Grande, which is 1,200 miles of a 2,000-mile water. The rest of it, you got a combination of the fences I showed you, the vehicle barriers, the barbed wire, that sort of thing. Yeah, this myth, it said they talk about Trump wanting to build this barrier across the whole Mexican border, which is a myth. That's not the objective. They're looking for the places where they're most effective to start out with, and which is what they continue to do with these things.
Well, one of the places there was.
Pardon me?
If we start building more barriers, aren't the places where we need them are obviously gonna change? Because if we make it more difficult
Right.
in one place, they'll try to get across somewhere where it's easier.
Yeah. Yeah, but the thing of it is, when you make it more difficult, when it's easier, fewer of the people will go to the easier place. You will have frustrated some who won't try because of that, so it's.
Oh, yeah, I'm not arguing against doing
Right.
it, I'm just trying to understand the dynamics.
It doesn't sound like to me we're using technology very well, just looking at that. Sounds like those groups down there, looks like to me they're just using game cameras,
Yeah.
basically catching, and they don't do anything about it.
Well, the
So,
Border
I mean-
Patrol doesn't use the motion sensitive camera.
Well, I understand that, but you'd think the Border Patrol would have a little more modern technology than what somebody would.
Yeah.
And that, doesn't appear to me, at least observing what you got there, we're doing anything real
Well,
serious about it. I mean, I do think fences work, and I guess maybe I'm a little.
well, no, you're
Put it
right.
into a squeeze point.
I'll give you an example. For a while, the Foley was not operating by himself. He had another guy called Spartan. That was his name. I never knew his real name. He wouldn't give it out. But Spartan did the communication. And what they were doing was they were monitoring the communications from these scouts that are on the mountains. And they were able to pick them up and record them. So I was listening to some of the Spanish where the scouts are talking back to the cartels on the other side of the border. So with our technology, but the Border Patrol doesn't do that. But
That's
with
my
our tech,
point.
with our,
If you're a disorganized group
Yeah.
of volunteers, and you got
right, and we can do that.
technology, and you can do it,
Yeah.
then where's the government?
So now why they're not doing it, I can't answer, but they're not doing it, that we have the capability of doing it. We could sweep all those scouts off the mountains just like this because of intercepting their technology. Better use of drones, that sort of thing.
Oh, I just think, I mean, I believe the wall, you can put them into points of entry where you can watch and do it better, but I believe technology is also used appropriately. That,
Well, I agree with you.
I mean, we're really dropping the ball.
You're right.
All of what we said here tonight doesn't amount to anything if we
Send
don't
it-
rectify this problem.
Send an email to Senator Collins, and you'll get a
Yeah,
form.
well, no,
You'll get a form letter.
I've
The
written the
government
Senate
that's everything to
Collins
everybody is
before.
nothing to no one.
One more question?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, folks. I really like your new use of slides. It's really great.
Oh,
Thank you very much. Well, everyone, we now have the great honor and privilege of inviting up Mr. Casey Hughes to talk to us about his candidacy for District 45, which is all of Cumberland and part of Gray, southwestern Gray, I guess. And do any of you live in District 45? Do any of you know people who live in District 45? Okay, they know some people. Casey, thank you very much. And thank you again, Bob. Let's give him another round of applause.
I know it's late, and I don't want to keep everybody. I actually went to school here. I was a Patriot for 2 years. And my mother raised 3 of us by herself and dragged us all over the. We were house flipping for a lot of years. But I run a small business in Portland. It's called LT's. We do embroidery and screen printing, if you want to laugh. Got the logo on. And family business, my family started 28 years ago, and my sister said, we're all going to go out of business if you don't at least throw your hat in the ring. And so we did not have a Republican running in District 45. So I actually said, well, I've never been a politician. I've never run for office. I've done my time as a Chamber of Commerce president, a board volunteer in a lot of organizations. But I just couldn't stand the way they were throwing money around up there like they actually had it. My sister is I call her the introvert accountant in the family. And the first word out of her mouth is, no, we can't afford it. And she said, well, if we don't have the money, we can't buy it. And we've got a pretty nice little company. There's 12 employees. And I've been working 60 hours a week for almost 30 years to keep it alive. So to jump into this race is a little bit of a challenge, to say the least. But I just couldn't not try. Somebody said, you can't win. And I said, I can win. Anybody can win. So I'm going to ask everybody basically the only thing I have is fiscal responsibility. That is my job is to throw an anchor out up there and slow everybody down. Today's bill was free college for everybody. It was $340 million a year. That's today's bill. And it's like $340 million a year. Where's that coming from?
That doesn't sound free to me.
That doesn't sound free to any of us. It's not free to any of us. I mean, and while I went to Maine, and I remember burning my deposit book, the payment book that after 10 years after I graduated from college, I did burn it, and I was quite happy. It was a paper copy back then. But it is, it's an honor to run. It's quite an experience. I've had a great education in less than 3 weeks, by the way. It's just happened. Dale Deno passed away. He was our,
I was gonna ask you.
yeah, Dale. Yeah, Dale passed away. He was a good guy. I liked him. I'm running against a Democrat that I know who's a career politician, who's also a nice guy.
Nice guy, wrong.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm kind of, it's not my habit to throw myself at something new like this, but I was so frustrated with what's going on. And so I'm going to try it. And if anybody, it's going to be a close race. I do know that. And if there's anybody in 45, which I guess is Bruns Brothers to Wyndham, that gives you some sort of perspective on the mail route, which is the part of Gray that I have. And I have all of Cumberland. So I'm going literally door to door. I apologize for drifting in here late because I was knocking on doors just before I got here. So it is, it's a challenge, but it's a winnable challenge. And it's just, we need to bring a little balance to Augusta right now. The D's versus the R's. We're in a deep hole up there. And everything is getting ramrodded through. The governor's managed to spend the $138 million in the rainy day fund in less than 4 months. LePage took almost 6 years to build that up, and it's now gone. And she's got so many people right there. She's got so many. She's not done. She's not even close to done. And we've got, the session will end June 17th, and they've got so many bills cocked right now that you can't even imagine. I'm seeing it every day, and it's like, where's this coming from? Who's paying for this? And we all are. That's what it comes down to. So, it's not that I'm a rocket scientist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just a common guy with pretty good work ethic, and so I'm going to try it, give it a go, see what happens. But I think I can win, and anybody you can literally nudge to the polls on June 11th. It's a special, so it's an oddball one. So anybody can nudge anybody to the poll. Every single vote will count in this race. Mike Timmons lost the race, I think by 16 votes 2 trips ago. And then I'm running against Steve Moriarty. He's a retired lawyer from Cumberland. He's a good guy, been on the town council, planning board. I don't dislike him, I get along fine with him. But we have different money values, I guess that's the simple answer. So, I'm pretty conservative, so it would be the primary term I'd use if I was, describing my campaign. But anybody has thoughts, ideas, the palm cards that I just gave out do have my email address on them, and certainly I'll take, it's post 8 o'clock, and I know you guys will want to go home, so, and I'm sure everybody wants to, but I'll hang around. Anybody wants to talk, I'd be glad to take any questions and advice. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Well, Casey was the icing to a wonderful evening. So Bob, thank you again very much. It was very educational, and you've been putting the sweat and the effort in, and we need people like you to get out the word. So I really hope you all signed up for. I hope you all signed up for his email list, and we also have an email list, the Gray Republicans. The email list is on the desk out there. So if you haven't signed up for our list, sign up. There's also a donation basket out there. You can donate freely, as much as you like. $1 million, $1,000, $1, anything you like. Are there any final questions or comments?
Good night. Yeah, just a comment. One, not the most abused clause in the Constitution. I think the interstate commerce is probably the most abused. But the general welfare clause that has been redefined or reinterpreted to mean entitlements, which the Constitution means nothing of the sort. The general welfare is exactly things like protecting our borders,
Mhm.
which they're ignoring and they're violating in favor of, freebies and handouts. Just a comment.
Enough freebies, because nothing's free, right?
Right.
So thank you all very much.
But
Oh,
we do
one
have
more?
one free thing on Saturday, just to remind you, we have Guns and Issues in Maine at the Lake Region High School. It will be with Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine and also 2 speakers from Maine Heritage Policy Center on issues, and probably Bruce Poliquin also. It's
In
from-
Naples, right?
In Naples, the high school, and it's from 1 to 3, although it may go further because the gun issue will be after the break, so the questions, we'll be answering questions about from the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine.
Yes, we
So hope to see you there,
highly recommend that. I'm going, so.
good.
All right, thank you all very much. Good night.